achieving substantive indigenous capability in designing, developing and producing armaments, increasing private sector involvement, enhancing the participation of small and medium enterprises, and expanding the country's defense research and development. The same thing we have seen in 2014. The new, you can say, slogan in India is, since the government of Narendra Modi came to power in 2014, the Make in India initiative has become a new mantra for India's defense industry. And the Make in India, of course, you can say qualitatively, maybe they are unable to produce, you can say, a sophisticated weapon. But in this present globalized world of connectivity, and especially when India has now space program, you can say, agreement with the United States since 2004. Indo-US nuclear treaty since 2008 or since 2005. And then the major like Lockheed Martin or this F-16, they are going to invest in. So naturally this kind of investment, they will be going to make this time Make in India more, you can say, prosperous, more, you can say, shining as compared to their 50s, 60s or 70s policies. So there is a rough idea. Of course, maybe there is some more addition in it. But when you see that, though I said that Indian lobby or very influential lobby is targeting on 45 million plus in 2016, according to my, and this is a data which I am not sharing with you that is based on 2 years back, because data that is not available, 40 ordnance factories are there in India, a state-owned high-profile defense enterprise, a defense research development organization has 50 laboratories, private sector like Tata Motors, Ashok, Leyland, Mahindra and Mahindra, a sector they are investing and they are very much interested. Foreign direct investment 26%, and Ministry of Commerce and Industry demand foreign direct investment in the defense sector 4%. So what is the consensus or analyst consensus is over 50% foreign direct investment to boost this inefficient domestic public sector defense industry technological productivity will be going to make a change. Now let's come on to Pakistan. Because when we are looking about this gap or imbalance, you cannot ignore the other side. In the case of Pakistan, facilities include Pakistan Ordnance Factory, heavy industries, textile, large shipyard and engineering works, and the Pakistan Aeronautical Complex. Why did private sector involvement in defense production in Pakistan is missing? This is very important, and let me give you here why I am saying it's missing is important for us. If you see that Kashmir issue, NSC issue, there are many these kind of disputed issues, sometimes they have become very popular. Have you ever heard any discourse or debate in the private channels on these issues? The reason is that nobody is there interested to invest in this kind of things, except Pakistan television or Pakistan, what we call it, PTV World. Apart from that, I haven't, you can see any program, any analysis, any discourse, any opinion making, keeping in mind that how you can improve, how you can lobby, what is the public opinion. This is the point that if you have a private sector in, definitely for their own sake they will go for this kind of advertisement, and with that they will be able that you can increase these kind of programs so the public should be aware, the public should be ready to university decision making. Frankly speaking, there is no question of privatizing of any of these facilities. And that also reflects, sorry for my friends from the student community or the armed forces, the mindset of centralized. Organizational theory tells us that they are not ready to you can say, delegate any kind of thing. And this mindset that everything should be decentralized, everything should be in the government sector, definitely it is not in the longer term interest of Pakistan's defense industry. Pakistan's limitations, Pakistan's economic instability limits the military hardware development and purchase of the modern sophisticated weapons from the reputed Western defense contractors. And it is very much reflected, if you just recall, I showed that I presented a clearance with $7.6 billion US, whether you are able to maintain your existing forces, which are also fighting day and night with the means of terrorism, or you are able to have a more fund for purchasing. Frankly speaking, there is no fund that you can invest heavily or purchase new weapons. Maybe government is doing something, but because of these are constrained. Such constraints certainly hamper Pakistan Armed Forces modernization project and shift the balance of power, at least in the conventional realm, in adversary's advantage. Pakistan's countermeasures, of course, we have a countermeasures, and that's why one cannot feel very much disturbed what I said, that there are limitations. So countermeasure is that it is gradually maturing its nuclear triad and adding tactical nuclear weapons in its nuclear arsenal. Full spectrum deterrence, which incorporates the potential utility of small nuclear weapons. It manifests Pakistan's nuclear forces capability of both counter force and counter value powers. I think my friend from the United States must note this. This is the gap, and due to that gap, Pakistan is moving on that side. Let's say if there was no cold start, if there was no mega investment, if there was no proactivity operation strategy, certainly Pakistan hadn't gone for the tactical. Our foreign defense secretary was not compelled in October 2015 to say categorically that we have a tactical weapon to check the Cold Start doctrine while he was visiting the Washington. What is Pakistan's calculation here is the transformation in nuclear forces would produce a military capability of Pakistan to check India's freedom to do the conventional military superiority, to politically or diplomatically bully or curse at the extreme military adventurism in the form of militarism. So finally you can come, like this is the chart which you find, at the relative power position, whatever the indicator, whatever you can say, determinants of the power, there is population, budgets, everything, territory. At the conventional level or in the weapons, India is immensely modernized. Pakistan is facing constraint in modernizing. I'm not saying that we are not modern, but there is. That's why you see India has an advantage to use the nuclear weapon for prestige, domestic politics, or of course security. And in case of Pakistan, its primary objective remains within the security. So what is the outcome of the conventional imbalance? First, India is reluctant to accept Pakistan's nuclear restraint regime due to its advantage position in the conventional arms sphere. Because you know that if there is an arms control, then they have to practically at least treat Pakistan as an equal state. Second, the procurement of new weaponry also transformed India's traditional defense doctrine into offensive defense doctrine, that is Cold Start doctrine, and proactive military operations strategy. So my first implication is security dilemma, that is India's arms trade constitutes the recipe for a classical security dilemma, where its adversaries would view development as a source of insecurity. Second is action-reaction military build-up. It has its own dynamics. Then you have an interplay of forces of conventional and nuclear forces, and if there is an interplay or interface of conventional and nuclear forces, definitely it will be, you can say, bridging, or you can say limiting the gap between the conventional and nuclear, or what we call a nuclear threshold. There is also a vertical proliferation, both strategic and tactical level, and that proliferation is taking place in both spheres. So you cannot simply say, oh, Pakistan is going for a vertical proliferation, India is going. There is an expensive and extensive arms race between India and Pakistan, like tactical nuclear weapons, cruise missiles, TMD, sea-based weapons, purchase of sophisticated weaponry from nuclear, and all these kind of things. So when we are looking about this thing, the third implication is conflict escalation. The Russian weapons imbalance increased military advantages of India. It creates space for India's military adventurism in a selective sector like military war. The Indian Cold Start doctrine, and I think later on you'll find, is meant for blackmailing Pakistan's future. It also leads to us a conventional wisdom. What conventional wisdom suggests us that India has gained sufficient conventional superiority to fight and win a military war. But the reality is that India is incapable to prevent dangerous escalation. And dangerous escalation, why I'm using, because limited war or low-level conflicts have the potential to escalate to the next level, that is total war, including nuclear exchanges. The fourth, on my final, you can say, implication for the strategic equilibrium, the cumulative conventional capabilities would encourage the Indian ruling elite to use military force against Pakistan or threat of use of its superiority to blackmail Islam. These kind of tactics definitely are dangerous for the stability, and they also manifest that there is some change in the stability of the community. In conclusion, I can submit that Indian and Pakistani military